And we'd be given all these donations for nothing, So we don't want to do that. So at the time, Vichadravirya, he was the temple president, and he asked me, he said, could you get in touch with George and find out how he feels, and what's his feeling about us and his feeling about this property. So I called him, and he came over, and he had a good look around. And so we had been occupying the manor now for 7 years, because we moved in 73, in the summer of 73, and this is like the summer of 1980. We'd also had the property appraised by two banks, the Lloyd's Bank and the Barclays Bank. And we'd also, gone to our solicitor to get, to seek legal advice, what course of action we should take. So I put it to George. I said, really what we want is either we pay a rent and you give us a 100-year lease or something like that, or we can pay the property, in installments over, 10 or 15 years or something. But we really want to stay here. We've got so many people who want to give, sizable donations, £10,000, £20,000, maybe even more than that. But they know that we don't own the property. So we walked around, and he didn't like the fact that we hadn't maintained the gardens, because by that time he'd really got into gardening in a big way. And he identified himself as being a gardener. And I'd been over to his place, Friar Park, and seen what he'd done over the years. And it was amazing. He really got into even knowing all the Latin names of every plant and every herb. And, he had really done a wonderful job in his property. And he looked at our gardens, and they were like all full of weeds. And because, by that time, most qualified devotees are on the streets selling books. They weren't, in the manor, gardening and weeding and, trimming hedges and planting. That wasn't really our focal point of attention. So we didn't have any good gardeners, and the place was a terrible mess. He said, I'm getting a headache just walking around here. It's just like getting on my wick. You haven't looked after this place. And I was fearing the worst. He said, give me a week to think about it, and I'll let you know. Because he wouldn't tell me on the spot what he had decided. So he calls me up a week later. He said, look, this is what I've decided. If you can get together £45,000, because actually he wanted to give the place as a donation, but he couldn't legally, because a charitable foundation can't donate any property to another charity. There has to be some financial transaction. So he said, I've spoken with Alan Klein again, and what he's come up with is this. You put towards the cost of the property £45,000. He said, I'll put from my side another 145, which makes a total of 190. And we'll show it as a loss, that we actually sold the property to you as a loss. He says, I know you can't afford 190, but if you can come up with 45,000 within a week, the place is yours. Then I don't need to think about it anymore. And actually, like I told you, the property cost 220, so he's making a loss of about 30,000 through the books, at least. Now, as I had mentioned also, we had made an appraisal with two banks, and both had appraised the property at £1.5 million by 1980. That's how much it had increased in value, from £220,000 to £1.5 million. So we got the £45,000 together. We gave it to him. He signed the deeds over to ISKCON, and from that day onwards, the manor belonged to ISKCON. And a couple of things Prabhupada did say to me was kind of interesting, because it was, like I said, it was raining when he first came, and he wanted to see his quarters. And he told me two things. He said, this property is like gold kept in a dark place. He says to appreciate the value of gold requires light, especially sunshine, bright light, because gold naturally shines. But if you keep it in a dark place, then who can appreciate? He says, so and similarly, he said, this is a very valuable property, but because, of the weather conditions, who can appreciate? Because he was always really down in the British weather. I mean, it was like always raining and cloudy and miserable. Because, occasionally it would also be sunny, and we have these beautiful photographs and footage of Prabhupada sitting outside on the lawn on sunny days, at the manor.
1 day a year.
Or a week, maybe 2 weeks, And the other thing he said, because Prabhupada is very shrewd, he said, this is like a white elephant. This property is a white elephant. It's a white elephant is something very rare and very valuable, but it's very expensive to maintain. He said, similarly, this property you will find will be very expensive to run. And
he was correct.
it was very true what he said. Yeah, very true. And also what he said was, the other thing he was talking, and maybe I've mentioned this before, that he wanted the manor to be a place where it was famous for cow protection. He wanted that we buy a double-decker bus, these red London Transport buses, an old one, drive it into the centre of London, fill it up with visitors who would be willing to come out and look at the manor, spend some time there. And he said that we should teach the British the importance of cow protection, Goraksh. And he said we should keep 150 cows at the manor. Now, at that time, we had 17 acres of land, and there was only 6 acres of arable land, a field where we could actually keep cows. And so I kind of commented, I said, well, Prabhupada, it's not going to be very practical to keep 150 cows in 6 acres of land, because each cow requires a minimum of 1 acre of land. So then Prabhupada said, so you purchase 150 acres for the cows. What is the difficulty? But that's the minimum number of cows you should keep. So if you need to purchase another 150 acres for those cows, then you purchase. So that was said in 1973. Of course, since then, we've acquired another 55 acres of land. Because in 1997 we got the planning permission to put in the new approach road, and so we've just about got half of the amount of land that Prabhupada said we should have in 1973. And this is now 2002.
And how many cows?
25 cows. There's only 25. So Prabhupada's vision was always, very long range. We sometimes have a hard time in fulfilling, Srila Prabhupada's vision. So there's still another 75, 80 acres of land to be purchased, and because there is no place in the UK where this type of cow protection is being practiced. And of course, the idea to have so many animals was that then we'd be completely self-sufficient in ghee and milk. And he wanted us to sell the ghee to the visitors who were coming. And also he wanted us to be engaged in different types of handicrafts, like spinning and weaving cloth and making brass deities and all different kinds of handicrafts. And I said, well, what about the Indian community? Should we focus on the Indian community? Now this is perhaps may sound a little controversial, but Prabhupada said, no, we don't need to bother with the Indian community. They're already Krishna conscious. He said, we have to focus our attention on the British community. He said, they know nothing about Krishna. That's what he said. George and his wife, Olivia, they visited the manor in 1997. Was that ever touched? I thought that was quite amazing, because that was really the last time that George associated with a large group of devotees. And he had been invited to this celebratory dinner which was held in the summer of 1997, just a few days after we got the actual planning permission to build in the new approach road. And this was also shortly after we had this amazing fundraising dinner called Prabhupada's Dream, where all the patron members of the manor were invited to raise the funds to buy the extra land to put in the approach road. And the target was to raise £1 million in one evening. So a large circus tent was rented, and it was heated, and there was a stage erected there, and so all the tables were also